All right, folks, another big weekend of college football. It's week 4. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way with our live stream on Thursday night, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Much hyped, much talked about, all over the place in College Football Nation is tonight's show. It is the talk of College Football Nation, certainly. With Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football, Kevin McGuffey from the same site, Last Word on College Football, Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated, and we will also have Scott Wolf on from Inside USC. Most importantly, we will have you on the live chat, of course, and also the phone lines at 860-325-3687. Maybe a bit of an abridged version of Mark Rogers TV College Football Live tonight, as I will need to prepare for the Browns and the Jets with my boy. We will be watching Browns-Jets, stellar matchup, possible preview of the AFC Championship game tonight. So we're running from right now, 7 o'clock Eastern time, all the way until about 8:15 to 8:20 Eastern time. Again, we've got Georgia football talk as the Bulldogs prepare to go to Columbia to take on Mizzou with Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated. We've got Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football as Tennessee prepares for Florida. And then, of course, Kentucky, Mississippi State in the Commonwealth with Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football, Scott Wolf from Inside USC. First up, ladies first, Savannah Lee Richardson, Georgia, Mizzou. What's going on today, Savannah?
Well, today's our one day that the media we don't get practices availability. We do Monday through Wednesday. So today has been kind of collecting thoughts, packing, and getting ready to make the trip up to Columbia.
I know you're so excited about these practices and the fervor and the vibe at the practices. How do you make it through the non-practice day?
It's actually hard. I find myself like wanting to go to Butts-Mehre and like get ready to watch practice or get ready to talk to whoever. So it's kind of like, wait, I can go home. Okay, cool. So it's a blessing, but it's also like I love going to practice every day. So
I'm just having fun with you. But I got to say, there were days when I would go to practice and it was like, do I really need to go to practice? I'm seeing guys run around a little bit, and I see this every day. There were other guys. Hey, there were other days, I should say, in which I felt extremely blessed to be talking football and talking sports for a living and going to Mississippi State or Ole Miss or Alabama football practice back in the day. Georgia and Missouri. The Tigers, I don't know if you caught much of the game, probably didn't watch the game, it being one of those far-off games out in the Big Ten, wherever that is, against Purdue. But certainly you checked out the stats and what happened almost to Missouri on the road, taking on the Purdue Boilermakers as it went right down to the last-second field goal. So you got Drew Lock and company coming in.
Well, coming in, we're coming into their facilities. Anyway, they're extremely talented on offense. And I have to give credit to their defense as well. They're holding teams to 74 yards on the ground, and that's what Georgia likes to do, is run the ball. So Georgia will have to find a way to move the ball against you can say a tough Missouri defense. But Derek Dooley's done a really good job kind of transforming this offense into something that it's supposed to be. I know a lot of times, like in the last few years, what you've seen, and especially with Drew Lock, and he's so good, but at the same time, like, he can't close in those big games. And so I feel like this season he's done a much better job with his passes, being confident in the pocket, and just being overall an athletic guy. I mean, he's got Emmanuel Hall and then Albert. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce Albert's last name, but I've looked at a couple films from him and Emmanuel, and they're going to be mismatches against Georgia's smaller secondary, and it's going to be Georgia's defense is going to have a really, really tough challenge. And yesterday in practice, they were working with some of the inside linebackers and then some of the safeties and star guys and corners about working with the mismatch and how to cover guys that are bigger than you. And so I thought that was really interesting that they're continuing preparations. Granted, I'm sure they do that with whoever is like 6'5", whenever, like a wide receiver or something. But I thought it was interesting to see Natros Patrick being back there, Mark Webb being back there, guys that they need to be physical, having to go up against a 6'6" tight end, and it happened to be Georgia's true freshman tight end, John Fitzpatrick, who doesn't necessarily see the field a lot, but he helps out in practice with things like being a mismatch. But Missouri's really high strung on offense. I like what they do. They've even got a really pretty good run game going on as well. But I just, it's kind of one of those things where they've produced, but at the same time, like, they haven't played a defense like Georgia's either. So I think Georgia's defense will show up. But Drew Lock's definitely going to have well over 200 yards of passing.
You get Savannah Lee Richardson on the line from Bulldog Illustrated as Georgia prepares to take a trip to Missouri and face Drew Lock, coming off a big effort on the road at Purdue, a game that went back and forth. They gave up about 572 yards passing to David Blau up there, but survived the win. So both teams come in undefeated on the season. The Bulldogs have yet to be tested, even with a date at South Carolina. So they passed the first test. Did they get possibly a test here? I know that last year that at least statistically, I don't remember watching the game, probably didn't see it. I don't think I saw Missouri play football until their bowl game and maybe a little bit against Arkansas. But I did not watch Georgia and Missouri play last year. I'm sure that there were better, more important games on the docket. But if I recall, the way this thing went was that Mizzou kind of hung around. They did score some points and put up some yardage on the Georgia defense. It was like in that 45-30 range, something like that.
I think so. I know that Drew Lock's had like well over 300 yards. Well, no, it was 253 yards, and I think a couple of touchdowns and then an interception. They did hang around a long time, but Georgia's secondary was the weakest link in the defense, and I think that's what allowed Missouri to hang around so long, is because they were able to expose Georgia's secondary and use their big wideouts and big tight ends to their advantage. Our Georgia secondary is just going to have to be way more physical. DeAndre Baker and J.R. Reed are both going to have extremely good games, and then you're also going to have Tyson Campbell step up and make some plays. Being a true freshman, this is going to be his he had some tests the first 3 weeks, and I think last week gave him a great look as to what a pass-heavy team can do. And I thought I have to give him kudos because he did a great job with coverage last week. But DeAndre Baker's going to have to call some turnovers. J.R. Reed, Richard LeCount even too. Richard LeCount just seems to get better every week, and so I'm really excited to see him in an environment where his skills as a secondary player will be challenged with really good wide receivers.
So the boys are going to have to wake up mighty early on Saturday morning. So Eastern time, it's 11. It's noon Eastern time, but they're locally 11 a.m. Eastern time in Columbia, Missouri. I pulled up last year's box score. What I was really remembering was that at one point in the game, not deep into the game, Mizzou did not make it a game, but they did come out with a couple touchdowns in the first quarter. Late in the second quarter, near halftime, it was a one-score game, but Georgia really throttled them in the second half, 53-28. As you mentioned, Drew Lock, 253 yards passing on 15 of 25. He did throw 4 touchdown passes. That's what stuck in my head. I was rating quarterbacks in the SEC during the offseason, and I was looking at Drew Lock's statistics, which really were amped up against some really bad football teams. But I noticed it's not that he didn't play well against the good teams, because he did against Georgia in particular. Maybe some garbage time TDs, and Jake Fromm had a really nice game on 18 of 26 for 306, and the running game was in good shape here with 370 yards, with DeAndre Swift leading the way. So is there any issue with this game, do you think? Do you think this one could be a little tighter than expected?
Part of me wants to say yeah, because it's a noon game. Georgia's not quite. They played a new game last weekend, and the first few drives of the Middle Tennessee State game, I will say, besides the Holyfield run and it wasn't that it was sluggish, but I mean, having that early of a game, you have to wake up probably 6, 7 o'clock, eat breakfast, get ready to meet with the team and everything. And it's just one of those things where you're not quite awake yet, and you haven't isn't even a word. You haven't gotten to get into your rhythm and get into like a schedule of things like you do with a 3:30 game. Like, I know it's got to be hard, because I've heard players like, it's getting up early, it sucks, but at the same time, like, it's going to take us a while. So I think we just have to kind of bear with Georgia. They might struggle the first couple drives. I don't really know that they will struggle, to be honest. Elijah Holyfield, he's becoming somebody who is making a name for himself. I know I was one of his biggest critics. I actually did an article this week, and my title was Elijah Holyfield arrived? And I think this weekend is going to be a really good test for him, because I don't know that he got tested that much against South Carolina. And then you really can't say that he's done superb things, even though he's the first Georgia Black to get 100 yards in a rushing game. Anyway, not getting on a tangent about Holyfield, not going to have to, I don't want to have to put my opinion about that out there. Most people knows how I feel, but short sense, I put in the end of the article, if he can do what he did against Middle Tennessee State, or at least half of what he did against Missouri, who is, like I said earlier, holding teams to well under 100 yards rushing, then he's going to get some respect in my eyes. We talked to him this week, and he's catching 110 balls after practice with one of the managers, working on, catching that ball in the backfield and going up, something that he struggled with last year. I feel like people are so worried about his size and stuff. He's actually kind of proportioned himself to where he can carry the ball a lot more, carry it with a little bit faster intensity. And I'm excited to see him run. A lot of people are worried about Swift. I've been told Swift's fine. There shouldn't be issue with that one. But getting back to what you were saying, I think it'll be close in the beginning, but I also think that the way that Georgia's defense is they make teams quit. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen heading into the second half of the ball game. Missouri's just going to eventually bow down. And it's going to be hard to get Drew Lock to bow down, because he's a playmaker and he can do it with his legs and his arms.
Yeah, Savannah. So is there any thought right now, and probably even going back to before the season started, that the season's almost an afterthought, besides having to play in some corners? People thought that South Carolina could put up a challenge. Other than that, it looked like the game against Auburn, even though that's at home, probably the best team on the schedule. That not having that Notre Dame type game in the non-conference, and just it being Georgia Tech, who's really struggling right now, they're not being a collection of games to have a whole lot of concern about actually losing past one game. So I think some of us, including myself, looked at the Georgia schedule and did preseason and thought, okay, Georgia's better than every team on this schedule. So, and then Auburn's kind of a toss-up, but they've got the game at home. I like Georgia to win this game. I think they're a top 4 or 5 team in the nation. I think Auburn's more in the 10 to 12 range, something like that. Georgia stumbles maybe somewhere. Auburn, LSU, somewhere at South Carolina, or maybe they don't. And it's almost an assumption that because of the clear distinction of Georgia talent versus the rest of the SEC Eastern Division, that you guys are just kind of playing for Atlanta.
I think a lot of people will look ahead and do that, but it's interesting to see, because Kirby Smart every week, this is Middle Tennessee week or Missouri week. We're focusing just on them. And so it's got to be a challenge to keep the guys focused on just one team per week. I will say that I've had South Carolina, LSU, and Auburn probably circled on my list of games to keep an eye out for, just because, in years past, seeing how Georgia would be either, one loss or doing really well going into a game of that stature, and then just, blowing it. One that comes to mind is the Alabama game a few years back, sitting in the soaking rain, thinking we were going to come in and actually do something against Alabama, and just getting blown out. So part of me is like sitting back and being a little bit reserved, thinking, we still have to take it week by week. But the other part of me is like, yeah, Atlanta's very well foreseen in the future, and it's a lot closer than I think it was last year. I can be completely honest with you. Until the Mississippi State game, I really didn't know what this team had last year. And I think this could be that week for me, because I've had people say, it's going to be a blowout. I don't necessarily know that it'll be a blowout. I think Georgia's just going to go in and handle business. And I think that's what they're going to do every single week, regardless of who the opponent is. That's what he has instilled in their mind. This is a business trip. We're going in here to play football. We're not going to make stupid decisions, get costly penalties. And it's, we're going to do this in practice, then we're going to do it at the game, and then we're going to move on to the next week. So yeah, Atlanta's in the sights, but I'd like to just focus on Missouri right now, just because in a blink of an eye, Georgia could get upset just by a simple mistake or something. Not that I don't think that's going to happen because it's not a Mark Richt team anymore. This is a well-oiled machine. So it's kind of like, I think a lot of Georgia fans, including myself, are still in that kind of not limbo stage where we think that we're really good, but we're scared that we're going to mess up like we did in the Richt years, while the other ones are like, just, all right, national championship or bust. So I think after this game, I have a little bit better feeling of where this team could actually go. And it is against Missouri, and that's weird saying that.
Well, there were probably a few people that still felt that way when the train was rolling last year, that because of what had happened under Richt a number of times in previous seasons, that they hadn't seen it under Kirby Smart. But now you've completed one run to the SEC championship game, won the SEC, won a playoff game. So it's been proven by this coach and this coaching staff that we can complete the run. We can get through the SEC, win the SEC, win a playoff game, that we're not going to blow it along the way, that we did what we were expected to do as what many people thought was the best team in the division, but it was kind of on shaky ground early. I certainly thought they were the best team, but there were the doubters out there. And then once they went to South Bend and once they started to roll the other opponents, then it was pretty obvious it's not even close. They're the best team in the division. Are they going to stumble? And they did not. So it's a new era. It's a new situation. They're at Georgia, 14.5-point favorite against Drew Lock and Company in Columbia, Missouri. That's a noon kickoff Eastern time. Of course, you're watching Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Subscribe to our newsletter just by sending your email to mine. So send your email to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Ask anybody on the live chat. Ask other people concerning the newsletter. We've received nice reviews about it. We're 3 weeks in. We will have week 4 wrapped up on Monday and deliver that every Monday for you. The audio, if you're running errands, chores, whatever you're doing, working out, you can catch the audio on Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search Mark Rogers TV. Help out the channel by simply, Savannah, do you shop on Amazon?
I do. I probably shop more than I should admit.
Okay. So I'm reminding people that, okay, you probably understand. It wouldn't be difficult for you to guess how many men versus women watch my channel. What do you think the percentages are?
Oh, Lord, probably.
I just came across this like 5 minutes ago because I had a conference call with somebody and we were talking about all sorts of little business deals. But so I came across this stat. I wasn't looking for it, but it was there.
Okay.
Take a shot.
Probably 85% men.
95.
Well, to be honest, like I had like a higher number, but I was trying to give my girls some like love.
There's a few out there.
Yeah.
It actually was like 98% for several years. It's dropped to 95%. I think I'm getting better looking as I get older. I think that might be the trick there. Wink, wink. So whatever it is, 95%. So I'm guessing that most of the households are run by the women. They do the shopping. They're online spending the money. So I just let people know, hey, get your significant other to shop on Amazon. Well, I'm sure they already shop on Amazon. So the trick is that you don't even need to buy the products that I have a link under. You just need to enter Amazon using one of the links. So underneath all the videos in the description section are Amazon links. And I try to get it across that you don't have to buy what's in the link. If you just enter Amazon, then it helps out the channel. So I just throwing that out to everyone in terms of supporting the channel, as we've got a core group of folks that do an amazing job of helping us with likes and comments and now Amazon links and anything else we throw out there. What are we missing back here, Savannah? What do you think? Can you see the helmets?
I can. I wish I could see the Georgia helmet, though.
Okay, that's what I thought we were going to get to. So there were a few people online when we were doing a live stream last night that said, Mark, you need some new helmets. We've been looking at the same helmets, and I know you can't see the bottom row, but people see it over and over and over, and I kind of mix it up from time to time. They say, you need to add to your helmets. We've seen the same 6 helmets over and over and over for a long time. And I explained that the way I was envisioning my set at the time 2 years ago, leading into the college football playoff, that I thought, okay, I'm going to have a bunch of helmets everywhere. And so I bought the 4 from the college football playoff 2 years ago in 2016, Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Washington. And then we had a swag sale at work maybe 2 months ago. And I went out there and they had a couple helmets and the only 2 left. I would have bought, if they would have had 25, I would have bought all of them. But because they were super cheap, but they only had Tennessee and Ole Miss. So I bought them. Just people were like all of a sudden like, why do you have Tennessee and Ole Miss? But of course they're Tennessee and Ole Miss. I know they're not that good, but they're relevant. They play in the SEC. So anyway, I'm running a contest of sorts where I'm having people write in and tell me the 2 helmets that they want added, and whatever 2 teams are named the most times in the comments section of any videos between now and October 1st, I'm going to go out and buy those 2 helmets. So whichever teams come up the most, and I just announced this for the first time last night. So Savannah, if you want to see a Georgia helmet, you can vote as many times as you want. You just have to write that in the comments section, and I'll get a Georgia helmet.
Okay, I can do that. I'll just spam you with Georgia helmet comments, so it'll be the most. And then
well, somebody did ask me, who do you think's most deserving? And I said, well, based on what's going on right now in college football, I think Georgia and Oklahoma, they just kind of came to mind as being the best teams, the best programs that I don't have up there. Now, all time, Notre Dame, Michigan, USC, Texas, you could go a bunch of different ways. But right now, I'd say Georgia and Oklahoma would be the 2 teams that should be represented. But if Akron wins and Colorado State, then I'm getting Akron and Colorado State helmets. Whoever.
Hey, Colorado State, man. Yeah,
Mike Bobo.
Old Bobo. I like Colorado State. I thought they did a good job against Arkansas. I bet you could probably figure out a way to, like, with what you do, talk to people and get helmets donated so you don't have to purchase them.
So it's funny because at work, I don't know if anyone notices on some of the shows at ESPN, they have helmets, like they give out helmet stickers and all that. So if you go to my building where I work, there are people with helmets all over the place, because what happens is, if pick the team, Syracuse designs a new helmet, well, their old helmet, they look for the new helmet and they bring in the new helmet, and therefore the old helmet they're no longer going to put on the set. So they let somebody take it. Whoever wants it, take the Syracuse helmet.
Yeah.
And so people have either just a random team because they just want a helmet, a nice, legitimate helmet on their desk or their desk area, or they're an LSU fan, so they want an LSU helmet. So, but see, I couldn't get away with getting like 50 of them. That would be the problem, Savannah. See, I could only get 1. I could get 1 helmet, but that's all I would have. I would have like an Oregon helmet back there, but that's not what I'm looking for. I would want all of them.
That's the case. You would get an Oregon helmet like every 2 weeks because they changed their uniform.
That's true. That would be true. They were a bad example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there might be a fan or 2 that would just, like, hey, I have a helmet that I donate. But a lot of times fans get their helmets signed. There's got to be I'll look into finding a Georgia helmet so you don't have to buy one. Because I'm pretty sure I could find someone that's got a Georgia helmet that they donate to somebody talking college football.
So if it's the same size.
Is it like a normal size, or is it like a?
No, these are just like, they're just little helmets. I don't know what the sizes are. I don't know what to tell you about the size. I'd have to look it up. But if I got a regulation size Georgia helmet, then I couldn't like use it the rest of the time. But if I had you on, I would just have the Georgia helmet up there.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, maybe I'll do one of both.
What's that?
Maybe I'll get you like a smaller one and then a regular size one too. That way,
awesome.
Because Georgia's the next dynasty, so you might as well get ready.
That's what I keep hearing from you.
Well, I've heard it from a few.
Yeah.
Tony Barnhart had something to say about it on Paul earlier. He was just like, they can play with anybody. And I think Georgia can. And then someone was like, well, Kirby's going to meet Saban's win count, and that's when all hell broke loose. That was funny.
He's going to meet his win count.
Like however many wins Saban has won, like Kirby's going to like eventually catch up to him and surpass him. Someone I'm not 100% sure who said it. Paul was just talking about it and how the phones lit up from Alabama people and everything.
I think that's a long projection into the future. Saban's not even close to being the winningest coach of all time.
I agree. I mean, maybe they're just talking about in the SEC.
Are they talking about championships? Maybe in the SEC. I don't know what the SEC win list looks like. I'm assuming Bear Bryant is number 1.
Probably so.
I think Steve Spurrier is number 2. I believe.
I don't know. I'm just glad that Georgia has Kirby Smart as their head coach, and this week has really been telling because we've talked to a lot of guys that we don't necessarily always talk to. Jason Stanley, Jeremiah Holloman, Richard LeCount. They're starting to be guys that we get to talk to a lot more, and all of them are just they cannot. I know they're probably programmed to say some stuff, but all of them, the process and how they've bought into practicing hard and how the practices are so much harder. And you didn't really get that when around the Rick era and stuff. So it's really exciting. I'm excited to be a Georgia fan. I'm excited to be a Georgia writer. This will be my first trip to Missouri. So I'm excited. Hopefully it'll be better than South Carolina because South Carolina was, I haven't talked to you since then. Like that was not, I mean, it was a great experience. I had a great time being on the sidelines and doing my thing and stuff, but I probably would not go back unless I absolutely had to. The fans were just rude. It wasn't the team or anything like that. It was just the fans and a lot of derogatory comments, like even to myself for just looking into a crowd. So I won't go into like the details, but yeah, it was just, I've always been told, like LSU and Florida people are the ones to look out for when you go to away games because they have really tough environments. But someone told me, like, be careful of South Carolina. I was like, oh, it's like it's South Carolina. Like, they can't be that terrible, but they were.
Well, see, I think there's a difference there. I think sometimes we confuse massive crowds and huge fan bases with they must be nasty. And there is some overlap there that if you figure, okay, such and such school has this enormous fan base and they pack their stadium and they get 100,000 every week. So they must be fervent. Therefore, they're nasty. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have some smaller fan bases and they're kind of nasty, but the larger fan bases are actually respectful and they still are loud and cheer and have fun. So there's nothing wrong with that in not crossing the line. You got to have some sense about we can trash talk a little bit and have fun and make fun of you a little bit. But when the language gets nasty and when it gets overbearing and you try to be intimidating and all that, that's way too much.
Yeah. I mean, I have to go into each game and just kind of like take it as in because I had before working as a journalist, I didn't really go to a lot of away games. Didn't really, I was essentially too young. My family, we're big Georgia fans. We have season tickets to all the games and stuff, but they were always like, you need to wait till you're older so you can appreciate it. And so now I'm getting to experience it, and it's really eye-opening. I did Tennessee and Vandy last year, and both fan bases were super nice. Very respectful and stuff. But then I guess, then again, that week with South Carolina, like South Carolina genuinely thought that they were going to like get a piece of Georgia and run off with it. But it wasn't the case. And I think it just got worse as the day went on. But
so Savannah, I believe some people are doing some work for me here in terms of looking up all-time coaching wins in the SEC. I believe I see Vince Dooley at 3. I see Ian McGugan. Who's that? And 4, Johnny Vaught, Ole Miss 5, Ralph Jordan 6. So I don't know if that's Mark Richt at 10, Philip Fulmer 8, Nick Saban 9. So I think I had it right with the first 2 with Steve Spurrier at number 2 and the Bear at number 1. Savannah, before we let you go, Ryan, faithful viewer, is asking about the Georgia pass rush or lack thereof.
I don't think that there is a lack thereof. I think Georgia's pass rush is there. I don't think that we're necessarily trying to get to the quarterback as much as people are saying. You see teams a lot like Clemson get to the quarterback, but that's just because they're literally like outmanning a lot of the offensive linemen. What Georgia's doing is Georgia's getting a great push on the front. I've mentioned this. This has been a really big topic this week, but I've gone back and watched all 3 games and seeing David Marshall and Jay Hayes, Tyler Clark, they're significantly getting pushes on teams' offensive lines that are allowing Georgia to close the pocket a lot faster than the quarterback wants to and making him make a decision a lot faster than he would like to. Sacks will come. I think that, Georgia's defense hasn't really cranked the dial up to as much as they have. I mean, I think Georgia's defense can stop teams a lot more than they have been in the last 3 games. I think they've just kind of done what they were supposed to do, got through the game, and moved on to the next opponent. Now that we're getting into SEC play and we have a team that we're going to have pass rush on all week long, that's been an emphasis with the defense and Trey Scott and getting that push. But that push is already there. If you go back and watch the games and slow it down a little bit and look at the defensive line, Georgia's defensive line is getting pushed. So whenever fans are like, the lack thereof pass rush, just because we don't have sacks, we're putting pressure on quarterbacks and we're making quarterbacks make decisions quicker than they want to. It's just we're not sending anybody off the edge to get to him. We're not doing a lot of blitzes. I think I can count on one hand the amount of times Georgia's blitzed this season alone. And so we're beating teams with basic defensive packages and we're getting block and push in the trenches, and that's why we're wearing offensive linemen down, and that's why we're winning ball games and getting 3 and outs late in the game. It's coming. I think the pass rush will be fine. It's not a concern.
So it's my worst nightmare is when I'm confronted with a trivia question or some kind of question from somebody and I can't come up with the answer because I fashion myself as somebody who can come up with the answer. And that was a few days ago after the NFL games and Pat Mahomes threw his 10th touchdown in his first 3 games in the NFL. Yes, 2 games in the NFL. And no, 3 starts in the NFL. That's what it was. And somebody asked me, the former record was held by a few players. One turned out to be, long story short, Mark Rippon from the 1986 NFL draft. And I couldn't come up with his name. And that was just earth-shattering for me. And the reason I bring that up is because I see this name, Dan McGugin, who is 3rd or 4th or 5th in the SEC. I think it was 4th in the SEC. Yes, all-time in wins. I'm feeling a little bit better about myself, Savannah. He coached at Vanderbilt from 1919 to 1934, but I was not familiar with him. All right.
That's a little before our time.
Savannah Lee Richardson, Bulldog Illustrated. We'll have a great time and report back on Mizzou hosting Georgia this week and see if Drew Lock can keep the Tigers in the game for more than a half against the vaunted Georgia defense. Savannah, we appreciate you dropping by.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, now we got Mike Laval from Last Word on College Football. Florida, Tennessee going at it, the annual grudge match at Knoxville. Yeah, Mike, how you doing today?
Mark, doing fantastic. Always a pleasure to join you on Mark Rogers TV.
Absolutely. So if I served up top 10 coaches in regards to SEC wins all time, how do you think you would do?
I think I would do okay.
So
are you asking me to list the top 10 wins?
Well, Savannah was making the comment that there was an uproar on the Feinbaum show today because people were making comments and already projections that Kirby Smart would win more, whether it was wins or national championships or SEC titles, than Nick Saban. And there was a big uproar. And I was noting that Nick Saban isn't even that high on the list of SEC or national victories as a head coach. And so I just threw it out there that I surmised that Steve Spurrier and, of course, Bear Bryant ahead of him, and somebody found a top 10 list, and so the names just started to spit out.
Well, they're only
familiar with Mr. McGugin from Vanderbilt.
McGugin, the athletic center there at Vanderbilt's named after him. Of course, okay. I'm from Nashville. There's only 3 with 200 wins, right? Bryant, Spurrier, and Dooley are the only coaches with 200 conference wins. Is that correct?
I don't know that. I don't have the list in front of me. These are people in the live chat that spit out the top 10. And those are the top 3.
Yeah, those are the only 3 with 200 wins in the conference.
And then McGugan checks in at number 4.
So the rest of the list would be Fulmer's on there.
He's at 8.
SEC wins. Oh goodness. Let's see. I'm assuming Richt is on there.
Richt is 10.
Okay. So we're going up. We're going up.
Fulmer at 8, Richt at 10.
You said McGugan's 4, so he's the top without 200 wins.
Yes, we've got 4 out of the way.
Oh, Shug Jordan?
Yes, Jordan is at 6.
So we need 5 and 7, right?
We need 5, 7, and 9. Near and dear to your heart.
Maybe Johnny Majors. General Nealon. Holy Christmas.
Yes, at 7. So we've got 5 and 9.
Yeah, that's a little bit embarrassing. 5 and 9. Is Saban at 9 yet or no?
Yes, he is.
Okay. So yeah, he's been there. I think 10
he's
years.
on quite a clip.
Yeah. And so we need 7. So who would 7?
This is 5. Nealon at 7. This is number 5.
Number 5.
There's a stadium named after him.
I'm drawing a blank right now.
Got Johnny Vaught.
Okay. Yeah. So I didn't know that one. I honestly didn't know that one.
Vaught Hemingway. Yeah.
So, hey, 9 out of 10, same as Mark Rogers. I'm feeling pretty good about myself tonight.
Same as me.
You said you couldn't get McGugan, right?
No, I said that don't give me that much credit. I said that we were talking the Smart versus Saban projection, and then suddenly somebody caught up with a list. I think it's my guy NCIS Fanatic 21, and suddenly the name started coming in the numbers. So I'm just talking about I was not recognizing McGugan, and I knew the rest of the coaches. I didn't name them.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So 9 out of 10. I don't know what I would have done. I'm sure I would have missed a few along the way before I got to the 9 number.
I was just worried that maybe there was a Georgia Tech coach in there that I missed. Heisman. I'm sorry. Bobby Dodd came before their SEC period, or at least on the very beginning of it. So he didn't build enough time in the SEC. I wasn't sure if there was another coach in the 40s, 50s, and 60s for Georgia Tech that I may be missing.
Yeah, Mike Laval on the line from Last Word on College Football. Please join him. You got Tony Siracusa, Kevin McGuffey as well. They're at Last Word on College Football. Lauren Beasley doing some great work, as always. So, Mike, before we dive into the Florida-Tennessee game, you see that the Vols are represented right there.
I see it. Very nice. One of the great iconic brands in college football. It's probably going to help out MarkRogersTV.
Absolutely. I would just expect that we're going to explode because of that move that we've recently made. So I'm running a bit of a contest for people that want to see, because it was mentioned several times in the live stream last night, they want to see other helmets up there. So I said, whichever 2 helmets are named the most times in the comments section between now and October 1st, I will purchase those 2 helmets. I was stating that if we were just going to base it on brand name currently, value of the football program and current status in college football, not status, the strength of the team and the status of the program and the strength of the program right now, what 2 do you think should be added?
Well, I think when you talk value, obviously that's more than financials. I mean, you're talking the holistic approach, right? The kind of the marketing perspective, fan base, program, that kind of stuff, right?
No, I was a little more granular just with the football team.
Okay, so you mean quality of the football team?
How good's the football team? Maybe not this week, but
yeah. So I think right now it's a 3-team race. I think Alabama is clearly the best program.
Okay, they're already up there.
Yep, I think you got Clemson.
So it's who I don't have.
You got Clemson up there. You've got Ohio State. Those are I think those are clearly the top 3.
Okay.
if I had to go with a fourth, to be honest with you, if I had to go with a fourth, as far as the last 5 years, quality football teams, Oklahoma. Oklahoma would be number 4.
Okay.
I think maybe Penn State at 5.
Okay.
Under the radar. Let's see, last 5 years. I think that's really your. I think that's really maybe the top 5. Everything else after that, I think, is kind of opinion based.
Yeah, I was going Georgia, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think Georgia can make a strong bid for number 5 right there. If you look at the last maybe 2 seasons, maybe if you go back 5 years, they probably 6, 7, 8, 9 ish. But last 2 seasons, clearly, I think Georgia's probably 3, 4, 5 range.
And then going from an all-time brand standpoint, we would have a real tussle between Notre Dame, Michigan, USC, Texas.
Oh, yeah, Nebraska. Yeah. Then you got to talk about the teams like Tennessee, Nebraska, and Texas, who are kind of all-time programs, but suffering right now.
Yeah.
And where do you fit those guys in at? Are they at their all-time win record places, like 6, 7, 10 in the case of Tennessee, or in the I think Texas is 3rd, I believe, all-time wins, or do you weight the modern era, the last 10 years, the last decade? Do you weight that more heavily? At which point, obviously, Tennessee, Texas, and Nebraska are down. They'll be lucky to be in the 20s at that point.
Yeah, that's a good number that you just alluded to. Texas won its 900th all-time game last week against USC, joining Michigan and Ohio State. Got Mike Laval on the line from Last Word on College Football. We're here to talk Tennessee and Florida. What have you seen out of the Vols? Many of us saw the first portion of the game. I will checked out at the point that it got out of hand against West Virginia. A shutout against UTEP last week at 24-0. I looked at the numbers, saw that Ty Chandler ran wild. Jared Guarantano had a nice, efficient game. Your thoughts about the play of the Vols right now?
Well, I think the biggest concern for Tennessee fans is the offensive line. A lot of people are talking about the 350 yards of rushing last week. I think that's kind of deceptive. One, UTEP is probably the worst FBS team in the country. And so 2, Ty Chandler had 81 yards on 1 rush. So that's really 260 yards on 49 carries. A lot of people don't realize they had 50 carries total in the game. That's a lot of rushes. And so once you do the math, 49 carries, 260 yards, you're looking at just a hair over 5 yards per rush against a UTEP team where you should be a superior athlete at every position by at least 2 stars. You would think on 49 rushes, they would actually have more yards than that. So I think people kind of saw that box line of 354 total yards rushing, I believe, 350-something total yards. And I think that's kind of deceptive. Again, Chandler had that big 81-yard burst, which kind of inflates the numbers. People don't also look at the fact they had 50 rushes last week compared to only 17 total pass attempts, I believe. I think it was 50 rushes, 17 total pass attempts. So don't get too wrapped up in the 350 yards against UTEP. So I think everything goes back to the offensive line. That they have looked shaky all season. West Virginia's interior defensive linemen controlled that game. That's really what allowed the West Virginia defense to keep Tennessee's offense off balance. They have not looked very strong in the rushing attack either. They're adjusting to schematics. They have talent on the offensive line. They need to find consistency, and they need to learn the scheme. In the past, under the Butch Jones, they ran almost exclusively a zone rushing attack, a zone blocking attack. Under the Tyson Helton era, they're running a little bit of combination zone blocking and man blocking as well. So there is a little bit of a learning curve that they have to go through. Of course, they lost Alabama transfer Brandon Kennedy at center during practice 2 weeks ago, so he's out for the season. So an already thin unit is even more thin after losing Brandon Kennedy there at center. The receivers have looked very good, very consistent, very strong on the outside. It looks like we got a 4-man combo of Juwan Jennings, Marquez Callaway, Josh Palmer has looked good, and Brandon Johnson. Both those guys have looked good on the deep routes. The running back, 4 running backs have all looked pretty good. You mentioned Ty Chandler. Jeremy Banks came on against ETSU and looked really sharp. Madre London, the transfer from Michigan State. And then the 4th guy, help me out here. His name escapes me right now. I'm sorry, I just got done with my afternoon run. Ty Chandler, Madre London, Jeremy Banks, and I'm going to have to go find it. So, but the running backs, Tennessee's rotating 4 running backs there. They've looked pretty consistent, and they've all have their own. They all have their own attributes. Ty Chandler is really the big play. I'm sorry, Tim Jordan. Tim Jordan's the 4th running back I'm looking for. They all have their own attributes. Ty Chandler is kind of the big play guy with the speed. You saw that against UTEP on his 81-yard run. And then Jeremy Banks kind of adds a little bit of attitude down there on the goal line, and Madre London also brings that size. Tim Jordan's kind of a utility back. Kind of what you would think is a change of pace on 3rd down, kind of a mixture of all 3. But the best thing on the offense that we've seen is Jarrett Guarantano. Been very consistent. He's looked good throwing the ball. Hasn't had any egregious throws that were just way off base. He's made pretty good decisions. We haven't seen him run very much. I don't know if he's been on a no-run order or not. He did have 3 or 4 called rushes against UTEP. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does that. I think when you look at the offense against Florida, you're going to see a lot of quick plays to get the ball out into space away from the offensive line to ensure that the lack of pass protection doesn't hamper the offense's ability to get into rhythm. And you're going to see some consistent running probably on the edges just to try to wear down that defensive front. So I think that's what we've seen on the offense. Defense, I don't think fans really kind of have a good grasp of what they're going to see. The defensive line has looked pretty good, but of course last year Tennessee got gashed, particularly second half of the season. Several teams had 400 yards rushing against them. Linebackers were pretty quiet against West Virginia. They didn't really show up on the stat sheet. You really didn't hear their names called, but they've gotten better. Teams always talk about getting better from week 1 to week 2. Tennessee's defense has clearly on tape progressed every week of the season. The linebackers have made a ton of progress. Darren Kirkland Jr. leading that group. Daniel Batelli has had a couple of good weeks. Will Ignat had a good week last year as well. If they could get some pass rush off the edge with Jonathan combo, which we have not seen at all this season, if they can get that pass rush from combo, that would add a new dimension to this defense. And then no unit has made more progress in the first 3 weeks in the defensive backs. A lot of young guys back there. The 2 safeties have been kind of disappointing. Nigel Warrior, Micah Abernathy, and then they've rotated some of the young guys through at the safety position on a 2-deep look. But the cornerbacks, they kind of got carved up second half, particularly in the fourth quarter against West Virginia. They've looked pretty good the last 2 weeks, again against inferior competition, ETSU and UTEP, but they have clearly progressed over the last 4 weeks. Going in against Florida, Florida's a good team, no doubt about it. They're always a good team, but they're not West Virginia. Felipe Franks is not Will Greer. So it'll be a really good test for Tennessee to see where they're at in the new Jeremy Pruitt era in week 4 of that.
We've got Mike Laval on the line from Last Word on College Football. Please join him for college football coverage across the board, specifically the SEC and down to the bitter bone when it comes to Tennessee football. And you're going to get your complete grading of the Vols' performance against Florida each and every week against all the Tennessee opponents from Mike. And that typically comes out, early Sunday?
No, I do my game grades every week. I try to get it out immediately after the game so that all the readers who read it kind of have the game fresh in their mind. That can just try to encourage dialogue there. It's always fun to interact with the readers. I try to get to as many comments as I can. So I try to push that out immediately after the game. So after the game when you're trying to either enjoy your happiness or kind of or wallow in your misery, check it out at lastwordoncollegefootball.com, or just follow me at Mike_L_LWS and read it and then give me your thoughts and let's talk about it. And sometimes you'll agree with me, sometimes we'll disagree, and we can kind of talk about it.
So I'm going to wield what very little influence that I have, and we enjoy ourselves here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and we've got a pretty strong core of people that join me on a regular basis. Check on Mike and the rest of the gang there at Last Word on College Football, and specifically Mike in the breakdowns that he has with Tennessee football. If you're not a Tennessee fan, but you want to keep up with the big games, join him after the big games in this one coming up in the SEC East, a traditional affair with Florida. And Mike, the way things size up in this one, this series has become a slugfest of sorts. We did have a nice game with Josh Dobbs coming back from way down against Florida a few years ago, like 21-3 to win at 38-28, I believe was the score. But that aside, there's been a lot of grind out type of games dramatics at the end, possibly like we had last year. And this one looks to be no different.
Yeah, I think it's representative of where these programs have been for the last 10 years. What is really a great rivalry, it's not one of the historic SEC rivalries. It's not Georgia, Auburn. It's not Alabama, Tennessee. It's not one of those rivalries. It's really a modern SEC rivalry. They didn't play. I think they've only played 42, 43, 44 times total. They never played yearly until 1990, and then they've played every year since they both became members of the SEC Eastern Division. So it's really a modern SEC rivalry. Obviously, in the first 20 years, it was a national championship landscape shaping game. I believe 1992 to 2007, those 18 years, I believe 10 of those years, both teams were in the top 25, and the other 8 years, at least one team was in the top 25. But in the last decade, unfortunately, that kind of grinded out game has been the prevailing product on the field, and it's really been because these two teams just haven't been as good as they were for the first 20 years of the rivalry. So you see, it's been a lot of sloppy football. You go back to 2014, I think it was a field goal fest. Tennessee really controlled the game, but they couldn't punch it in the end zone. Florida comes back in the fourth quarter, wins that game. They steal another game in 2015. 2016, of course, was the 35 unanswered. Ducks can't pull trucks game. Tennessee finally breaks the streak behind Josh Dobbs and that potent second half offense. And then last year, again, as it was in 2015 and 2014, Tennessee kind of controls the game. They have it in hand, and then Florida scores on the 66-yard touchdown pass on the last play of the game to again cough it up against Florida. So it's been dramatic, but you're right, it has been kind of grind them out games. In general, Tennessee has fumbled away to Florida just because the product on the field hasn't been what fans of our generation expect. Fans who grew up from 1990 to 2010 and saw those 20 years of SEC on CBS, 3:30 on Saturday afternoon, and the third Saturday in September, the big first SEC game usually for both of these teams, and really set the stage for who was going to win the SEC East and have a shot at the national championship. Particularly in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was really the game that set the tone for who was going to have the inside track for the SEC championship. I believe in the first 10 years of the SEC East, every winner of the SEC East was either Tennessee or Florida.
Yes, and speaking to a guy that can, just because I remember stupid stuff like this, can recite the teams involved in the scores of all the SEC championship games, I'm not going to go through it. I think you're correct. I'm trying to think the first team that would have broken through. Was there anyone before Georgia in 2002?
Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia in 2002. So speaking of which, coming right off of your dissertation there at the end, our guy Drake on the live chat, letting us know once again that you can't spell citrus without UT.
Yeah, and that's what makes the rivalry what it is. You got some great personalities. You got some great players back in that first 20 years. Daniel Werfel, Peyton Manning, T. Martin, some of the great Florida quarterbacks. Of course, Spurrier adds a dimension to it. Spurrier grew up right outside of Knoxville. Went to Florida, won the Heisman Trophy there, and of course is a great personality. And when you look at different personalities, you can't really juxtaposition Philip Fulmer with Steve Spurrier. You're not really going to get more of 180 degrees in college football, particularly in the SEC, where coaches generally tend to be conservative and more quiet. Steve Spurrier kind of breaks that mold. So again, that's what kind of makes it the modern SEC rivalry it is. Those two personalities leading the programs, and then there's been some drama in this rivalry as well, with the Faxgate with Ron Zook. Some of the very questionable calls on the field, but I think one of the driving factors is that kind of Spurrier poking at Fulmer, and the juxtaposition of those two coaches who lead the program. That's been one of the great driving factors of this really enjoyable rivalry.
I was down in the SEC covering the sport from 94 to 2000. Most of my emphasis on Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Alabama. We were only about 45 minutes away from the campus at Alabama, but it was funny because thinking about what's transpired over the last 10 years in the SEC, that was the game. That was the game, and that division was better than the West. Typically, Alabama and Auburn, they were good. They broke out a few times during that time, but not at top 5 type elite status. LSU wasn't that good. Mississippi State, they had a one big year in which they pushed your Vols to the brink in the 98 SEC championship game. But it was going on in the East. It was Tennessee, Florida always, and it was Georgia. Are they going to jump up and challenge? And they typically didn't during that little time frame of 6 to 7 years. But that was the game.
Yeah, it's much different from today. You get young kids, teenagers, and 20-year-olds who understand SEC football today, and where the SEC West is clearly the dominant division in the conference, and probably the dominant division, or probably the dominant division in college football, maybe save the Big Ten East. But it's absolutely correct. It was a role reversal in the 90s and early 2000s, where it was really Tennessee, Florida, and every now and then an SEC West team would win. I think Tennessee was the last back-to-back SEC champion until Alabama did it 2 or 3 years ago. So that just speaks to how strong it was. And of course, Florida won a couple SEC championships there early, minus the first one, which I think was the Antonio Langham interception, Alabama, that sealed that game against Florida. But yeah, you talk about those early mid-90s and maybe early 2000s. It was Tennessee, Florida, and that was really the team. The winner of that game in the third Saturday in September really had the inside track to the SEC championship and really established themselves as the favorite both in the conference and on the national landscape.
Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football joining us to talk Tennessee, Florida, also the SEC. And so speaking of which, we've had this discussion for 5 to 6 years that I've had Mike on in regards to conference rankings, and I go to Mike frequently in regards to the landscape of the league, the landscape of the nation, and a number of issues that typically affect the field but are more broad topic debates. And one would be the strength of the SEC. And I think I've got enough results in play to name it the best conference in America. I just think there are few cracks in the armor right now, and they're at the lower rungs, and they're very just minimal one-offs of particular games. But the overall matchups, the SEC is taking care of business almost each and every time against a like-seeded big opponent.
Yeah, I published an article last week at the beginning of last week called Conference Call. They're on Last Word on College Football. Kind of evaluated the conferences after 2 weeks. I think you and I agree on this, that maybe the SEC in 2016, 2017 maybe regressed a little bit. There's an argument, particularly in 2016, was the ACC the best team? Last year, the Big Ten made a very strong statement with their bowl record and their regular season record. But 2018, the SEC has come back with a vengeance. Auburn's win against Florida was really big. LSU's absolute demolition of Miami was a statement setter. Really, if you look at the SEC, even the losses they've had, particularly Tennessee to West Virginia, which was close in the third quarter. West Virginia is clearly a top 15 team nationally. And then Notre Dame last week, or Vanderbilt to Notre Dame last week, where Notre Dame was very close to Notre Dame. Their losses haven't been bad, with the exception of Arkansas. Arkansas just looks terrible. They just got pummeled by North Texas. So that 14 team there in the SEC, and you know this because you've had me on several times. When I look at conferences, I kind of break it down into the quartiles: the top quarter, the top middle quarter, the bottom middle quarter, and then the bottom quarter. To me, when I'm looking at conferences, I want to evaluate all 14 teams and how strong is each one of those quarters of the conferences. With the SEC, you look down there, and for the exception of Arkansas, for the exception of that number 14 team, the conference looks real strong. Mississippi State's win over Kansas State, that was huge. And then going back to those good losses, Texas A&M taking Clemson to the brink. I know that was in College Station, but still, Texas A&M looked really good against clearly the best team in the ACC. A&M might be the fourth best team in their division, and they were a 2-point conversion away from winning that game against Clemson. Ole Miss's victory over Texas Tech is another one not to be overlooked. But so I think the SEC, you look at the Big Ten, they are who they are. Great teams up top. Ohio State has looked good. Penn State has looked good. But then you look at that Michigan State loss to Arizona State. You look at Maryland losing to Temple last week. Temple has not looked good. They're on tonight. You look at Temple. Temple has not looked good. Maryland coming off that big win against Texas and then lays an egg against Temple. That's really bad for the Big Ten because Maryland's one of those teams that they need to compare against Tennessee, Florida, and those other bottom quartile teams. And then you look at Kansas just demolishing Rutgers. So when you look at those bottom teams, Oregon State in the Pac-12, Arkansas in the SEC, Rutgers in the Big Ten, and then Kansas in the Big 12. When you have Kansas beating one of your teams by 55-17 or something, that hurts your conference a lot whenever you lose, whenever you have a team lose to Kansas. So I think you're right. The SEC has looked really strong over the first 3 weeks. They'll get a chance to continue that or pull back a little bit. Florida still has a game against Florida State late in the season. Georgia Tech, which is always close even when one of those teams isn't good. But the SEC has laid the gauntlet down and said, hey, we might have regressed a little bit the past 2 seasons, but we're back, and we've got a quality product on the field. Certainly, I think the SEC has distanced themselves this season, early in the season, through week 3, and that's really going to help. The CFP absolutely looks at strength of conference. You saw that last year with 2 SEC teams in, and I kind of made the joke at work that if Texas A&M had beaten Clemson, we might have seen 3 SEC teams in the CFP this year.
It can happen. It's a narrow path, but and the CFP would do everything possible to try to avoid it. But man, if the LSU goes unscathed except for losing to Alabama or vice versa, they beat Alabama, but Alabama wins the rest of its games. Whoever shows up at the SEC championship game, there's a 1 loss from 2 teams, and there's a no loss from another team that wins the entire league. Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, particularly when you have top teams playing other top teams early in the season, such as Auburn and Washington. So, you get an Auburn team, had they beat LSU and then maybe lose, and maybe their only loss is to Alabama, they finish second in the Western Division with a win against Washington. And then maybe, of course, in that case, you'd have to have Oklahoma and Ohio State stumble. Probably one of those teams, probably both of those teams would have to have 2 losses. And then you have Alabama and Georgia doing what they do, going undefeated, except for whoever wins the conference championship game. That was really the strongest path with Auburn's win against Washington. Now that they've lost to LSU, there's probably not a path for 3 teams, but that was absolutely the strongest. But again, that would have required both Ohio State and Oklahoma to trip up and have 2 losses, or else. To me, that was really the only legitimate path for 3 teams. Obviously, it's a less than 1% chance, but
What Vandy did at Notre Dame was good enough for me, because I go beyond the final score and think about, okay, how did these 2 teams compete on the field? And when a wide receiver, Lipscomb, almost comes down with a pass at the 10-yard line that would have set up Vandy to pull off an upset in South Bend, that's good enough for me to say, sure, the win is all that counts in the results and the standings, but in evaluating teams and by extension conferences, can you imagine for the public perception if Vandy would have gone to Notre Dame and then Notre Dame turns around and churns out a 10-2 year and Vandy's like 1-7 or 2-6 again in the SEC, what that would have done for conference perception. My goodness.
Yeah, particularly, Notre Dame's already got a big win against Michigan. So again, Vanderbilt's loss at Notre Dame actually kind of hurts the Big Ten in a way, because Notre Dame really controlled that game against Michigan, and they weren't able to do the same thing against Vanderbilt.
Mike Laval, last word on college football. Mike, we appreciate it always.
Mark, it's always a pleasure to join.
All right. Of course, we've got Kevin McGuffey standing by. So SEC haters, bear with us. We're going to stay with the SEC and stay with the last word on college football. Kevin, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you stopping by. Of course, your guys have a big game coming up with Mississippi State, a vaunted team out of the SEC Western Division that could make a run in college football's best division. You guys have the nice win under your belt going to Gainesville, and the monkeys off the back as we merrily wrapped up following the win in Gainesville. So now that Kentucky's played another game against Murray State, and not a whole lot to talk about there, but now matching up against Mississippi State and probably the biggest challenge to date.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, Kentucky going for their first 4-0 start since 2008. If they're able to knock off Mississippi State, it would be, a huge win, because, Kentucky and Mississippi State are permanent rivals in the SEC, and Kentucky's lost 8 of the last 9 against Mississippi State, 9 out of the last 11. So it's a huge game. Kentucky got through the Murray State game with basically no injuries, which is always a key in those kind of games. You want to get that win. but you also want to get, your second and third stringers some reps and, some playing time. And so it's going to be a really good game. It's going to be, one of those deals. I think whoever controls, you can say this for any game, but I think in this game especially, whoever controls the line of scrimmage is going to win. I think, the combination of Benny Snell, Terry Wilson, even AJ Rose. I think Kentucky's got to rush for 200 yards, try to control the ball to have any chance of winning, and going against that that vaunted Mississippi State front seven. It's going to be, I think, tough to do.
All right, Kevin, of course, you play Mississippi State each and every year. This is going to be one of the better Mississippi State teams that you've ever faced. Last season's game got out of hand sometime before halftime. How would you compare the Cats right now versus where you stood at that point in the season last year?
I think, Kentucky is in pretty good shape. Of course, we thought Kentucky was pretty good, sitting pretty good last year. And we saw what happened. It was just kind of a perfect storm last year. Turnovers, turnovers, bad plays. And it just, as you said, it just got out of hand. I think Kentucky's very confident. I think, I don't know if you've seen, Benny Snell made the comment earlier this week that he said, didn't matter who Kentucky was playing. So we're going to run. I can run on everybody or anybody. It didn't matter if it's the NFL team, if it was, could have been, the Chicago Bears, the Monsters of Midway or something. And, one of the Mississippi State players, I think it was Colin Hill, responded back with like a tweet with, basically laughing. And then Snell, of course, had to, chime in again and, said something about, you're a clown or something like that. So, there's a little friendly trash talk between the two teams. I don't think, hurts anything. Makes it even probably more exciting. And plus it's going to be under the lights, Saturday night there at Kroger Field, and what they hope is going to be, a sellout crowd. They've, made a big push to sell, there were a few thousand tickets still available for this weekend's game. And the university's made a big push to try to get, every seat filled. They're going to do rally towels and, all this other kind of stuff. They were going to do like a blue-white thing. One section does blue, another section does white, but I don't know. I think people got confused. I'm not sure what happened there, but now they're going to rally towels. So, but yeah, it should be a great game. Like I said, going back to what your original point, I think Kentucky, they feel really good. They feel really confident right now. And I said it should be a fun game to watch Saturday night.
Yeah, so Kentucky, Mississippi State getting together. Of course, the Cats are undefeated, as are the Dogs. Those two teams probably the best chance of the remaining teams in those respective divisions as dark horses to possibly make a play in their respective divisions. Kentucky, before we let you go, Kevin, interested in your thoughts about Terry Wilson's development at quarterback. We, of course, talked about it following the big Florida win. And his development and trying to take this thing through what's going to be a gauntlet here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, he's gotten better every week. One of the things I talked about, the post I have up right now, Last Word on College Football. The first 6 quarters of this season, Kentucky had 6 turnovers, and in the last 6 quarters they've had none. And that's been the big knock on Wilson, is that he's been turnover prone. That's another thing that's going to be a big key for Saturday is, holding on to the ball and limiting turnovers. Like I said, Wilson, he's doing, he threw for 163 yards, no touchdown or with no interceptions. I think he's getting more and more comfortable every week. You can see the playbook. They're kind of opening up the playbook a little bit more every week. I would not be surprised to see maybe a trick play or two coming out. They ran something similar against Murray State. Last week, the old gadget plays, double reverse, the halfback pass. Benny Snell actually got credited with a touchdown, last weekend on a trick play. So, but like I said, Wilson, you can see his confidence growing every week. And this game Saturday is going to be a huge test, because, as you said, they've got Mississippi State this week, then they go to South Carolina, and then Texas A&M after that.
Kevin McGuffey, Last Word on College Football, stopping by. Help us. We appreciate it, Kevin. I got a number of things going on here and need to get off the line very soon, but we'll let you go. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Talk to you later.
All right. Excellent. We've got USC, Washington State. Of course, that highlights our Friday night as the Trojans stay at home for Wazoo. We got Scott Wolf on the line with you inside at USC. Scott, I'll let you take it from here. I'm going to take care of some things. We've got about 3 minutes. And what happened in Texas in giving up 34 straight points?
Well, a lot of things happened. You know, they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't stop Texas on with their defense. Special teams was atrocious. And, you know, a lot of people were upset with Clay Helton as usual. This was a marquee game. It was a game to kind of assess where they're at. Texas wasn't even, you know, considered a national power after the way they started the season and the way they struggled. And USC got blown out. So now there's a huge amount of pressure on Clay Helton right now. And they play Washington State tomorrow night. And they're going to have to come out and play a lot better, a lot cleaner. They just can't make the constant mistakes on special teams. They have to be able to run the ball. Their defense has to play a lot better than it did last week. They just aren't physical enough on defense right now. So everybody questions everything when you lose, and that's kind of where they're at right now. Everything's up for debate.
So, Scott, it's a situation in which JT Daniels in the offense obviously couldn't make the end zone 2 weeks ago at Stanford. They go to Texas. They had a couple decent drives, capped those off, and then they got obliterated up front and couldn't make anything happen in the second half and let the game get out of hand. And as you mentioned, had the special teams blunder in which it was still a game and they could have gotten it inside a score, I believe, 23-16, something in that range. 23-17 would have been the score had they made the field goal, and that's what they were looking to do right there. My goodness, it's a tale of two teams in regards to scheduling and challenges to date. We're going to find out a lot about Washington State. They haven't played anyone. USC's had to face one of the more difficult schedules to date in college football, going on the road to Stanford and Texas. So they're battle tested at least. It's not proven to be successful, but battle tested.
Well, yeah, I mean, Washington State, I think, comes in with no pressure. They're not expected to win the game, and they're the underdog. And USC's got to turn its season around fast. And it's a Friday night game at the Coliseum. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people making the drive to the Coliseum on a weeknight and a night game. So I don't know how much support they're going to have at the Coliseum. I don't know how much energy there is going into this game. I just feel like, you know, it could be an upset special, but, you know, who knows what Washington State is at this point. So for them, it's a big statement game, I think. But, you know, they beat USC last year up in Pullman, so USC has a little revenge factor going there. But the fact is, I think Washington State can be the looser team, and they're going to blitz the heck out of JT Daniels because Washington State has 10 sacks already. And USC's given up 9 sacks already in 3 games. So there's no reason they're not going to try to rattle him because he gets rattled the past 2 games when there's a lot of pressure. And, you know, he played well overall last week, but he doesn't like pressure, you can tell. So I'm sure Mike Leach is going to want to blitz a lot.
Hey, Scott, you bring up one situation that seems to hit a sore spot with folks from the South and the Midwest when it comes to college football, probably folks from the East Coast when it comes to baseball, comparing themselves to the West Coast. So USC, I know from doing this and the response that I get from USC fans and the interest in USC football versus other fan bases, that there is intense interest in USC football. And when you mention a team that in a conference game is going to have difficulty getting people to the stadium, you understand that there's people can't relate to that in other areas of the country.
Well, I think it's the fact, you know, they lost to Stanford and then they get blown out by Texas. So there's not a lot of energy around the program right now and momentum. And we talked about this, you know, before the first game of the year. Clay Helton doesn't have a big reservoir of support from the fans. So I've already talked to people this week that tell me they're not going to the game, and I've heard from people in the athletic department they've sold about 30,000 tickets. I suspect they'll get more than that at the game itself, but it's kind of an indictment, I think, of where the support for the program is right now, because I think people don't have a lot of confidence in where they're headed, even though the schedule's getting easier, and they should win quite a few games the rest of the way.
So we talked about this during the offseason, and many of us saw this coming. USC with 2 difficult road trips in the first month of the season with a freshman quarterback and a young team in spots not handling it very well with the lack of an offense against Stanford from gun to gun, and then going to Texas and blowing a 14-3 lead en route to a 37-14 shellacking in Austin against a Texas team that did not look the part the first 2 weeks of play for them, but they got healthy against the Trojans in the second half. Scott Wolf joining us from Inside USC. Please join him there, insideusc.org, for some excellent USC football coverage. Scott, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, Scott Wolf. We had Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football, along with Mike Laval from the same site, talking Tennessee, Florida, also Kentucky, Mississippi State, big matchups in the SEC, along with Georgia, Missouri, and Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated. Appreciate all of you guys joining us once again. Sign up for the newsletter. Just send your email address to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. I'll have my predictions out by tomorrow afternoon, as well as, of course, conference rankings that I have promised through week 3. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We will see you guys on Friday.